In the year 1936, the British Empire stood at the height of its global power. The world watched the British throne, symbol of continuity, tradition, and monarchy. But no one could have predicted that this very year a king would renounce that crown. Not for power, not for politics, but for love. This is the story of King Edward VIII, the monarch who gave up everything to be with the woman he loved. Edward was born on June 23, 1894, at White Lodge, Richmond Park. He was the eldest son of Prince George, Duke of York, who would later become King George V and Queen Mary. From the very beginning, Edward, known to his family as David, was destined to be king. But even as a child, Edward never fit perfectly into the rigid royal mold. He was charming, handsome, and full of energy. But he disliked the strict routines and expectations of royal duty. The young prince preferred excitement, travel, and freedom over ceremony and protocol. As he grew older, his charisma made him one of the most popular royals in Britain. Women adored him, men admired him, newspapers praised his style and confidence. During World War I, he served in the British Army and visited troops on the front lines. Though he wasn't allowed to fight directly, he became a symbol of hope for a weary nation. But behind the public image of glamour and duty, Edward was restless. He was tired of royal restrictions, of being told what he could and couldn't do. And then fate introduced him to someone who would change everything: Wallis Simpson. Wallis Simpson was an American woman, elegant, witty, and already twice married. When Edward met her at a party in 1931, she was still married to her second husband, Ernest Simpson. But there was something magnetic about her confidence and charm. Edward was instantly captivated. At first, their friendship raised a few eyebrows within royal circles, but soon it became clear that this was no ordinary friendship. Edward and Wallis were deeply in love. They spent holidays together, attended parties together, and spoke on the phone every day. He showered her with jewels, letters, and affection, calling her "my darling Wallis." But for the British establishment, this relationship was a ticking time bomb. The Church of England, of which the king was the supreme governor, strictly opposed remarriage after divorce if a former spouse was still alive. Wallis had not one, but two living ex-husbands. When Edward's father, King George V, died in January 1936, Edward became King Edward VIII. The world celebrated his coronation, unaware that a storm was brewing behind the palace walls. As king, Edward refused to give up Wallis. He told his advisors he wanted to marry her no matter what. But the British government said no. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin warned him. If he insisted on marrying Wallis, the government would resign. The monarchy itself could collapse. Edward was faced with an impossible choice: the crown or the woman he loved. For centuries, kings had sacrificed love for duty. But Edward was not like those kings. He could not imagine ruling without Wallis by his side. He believed their love was more powerful than tradition, more real than politics. By late 1936, the scandal could no longer be hidden. Newspapers around the world printed headlines about the king and the American divorcee. The British press, initially silent out of respect, eventually joined the frenzy. It became clear something had to give. And then came December 11, 1936, a date forever etched in history. King Edward VIII addressed the nation in a live radio broadcast from Windsor Castle. His voice trembled slightly as he said the words that would shock the world. "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." With those words, Edward VIII became the first British monarch in history to voluntarily abdicate the throne. His younger brother, Prince Albert, shy, stammering, and deeply reluctant, became King George VI, father of the future Queen Elizabeth II. As for Edward, he was given the title Duke of Windsor. He left Britain soon after, joining Wallis in exile. They married on June 3, 1937, in a small ceremony in France. No member of the royal family attended. From that moment, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor lived a life of luxury and isolation, traveling between France, the United States, and the Bahamas, but never truly at home anywhere. Their love was glamorous, yes, but also haunted by what they had lost. Many wondered if Edward ever regretted his choice. He had traded the crown for companionship, but also lost his country, his family, and his purpose. Wallis, for her part, was forever labelled the woman who stole the king. During World War II, the Duke of Windsor briefly served as governor of the Bahamas, but rumours of his Nazi sympathies cast a long shadow over his reputation. Some believed he and Wallis had flirted with dangerous political ideas in the late 1930s, even meeting Adolf Hitler in Germany. After the war, they settled permanently in France. The Duke spent his later years writing memoirs, attending social events, and reflecting on his past. Though he and Wallis remained together until his death, they were never truly accepted back into the royal circle. Edward died in 1972 in Paris. His body was brought back to England and buried near Windsor Castle, the place where he had once abdicated his throne. Wallis lived another 14 years, dying in 1986. She was buried beside him, reunited in death as they had been in love. The story of Edward and Wallis is one of passion, defiance, and sacrifice. To some, it's a romantic legend, a man who gave up a kingdom for love. To others, it's a cautionary tale, a king who put his desires above his duty. But whatever you believe, one thing is certain. King Edward VIII changed the course of British history forever. Had he not abdicated, there would have been no King George VI, no Queen Elizabeth II, and perhaps no modern monarchy as we know it today. Edward once said, "You cannot be a king and have a private life," and in the end he chose the private life, with the woman who made him feel truly alive. So when we look back at that December night in 1936, we see not just a royal scandal, but a human story of love, loss, and the cost of following one's heart. He was the king who gave up his crown for love, and became perhaps the most unforgettable romantic in royal history. Fade out. The royal era outro logo appears.